Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm going to facilitate a conversation with our host, Peter Scalzo. And welcome, Peter.
Hey, Sean.
Welcome back.
Yes.
Glad you're here. I think we were talking about lament in our last podcast, and we've kind of gone through a couple of rounds, and we looked at the Psalms, and it was interesting just thinking about, this is a really common thing where bad things happen, and it's kind of led us to want to think about, when you get a cancer diagnosis or when you get really news that is viewed as really bad news, or we call them sometimes dark night of the soul events happen, is how we interpret those events. And so I wanted to just bounce around. We'll just go back and forth a little bit. There seems to be, I don't want to call it universal, but it may be universal, this kind of a question of, what did I do wrong? Does that resonate, that idea? Just how does that hit you whenever you think about, hey, your first diagnosis, or I know you and I talked about, you've heard friends or others who have had bad news, and that's the question that comes to mind almost immediately.
Yeah. I think I'll just say here that most people, I think it's okay if I say that, have a God consciousness, or there's this higher power sort of view. And so I think the temptation is, once you do get that bad news, it's, what have I done wrong? Or, where is this higher power or God? And if you're a Christ follower, a common viewpoint is that God and Christ are intimately involved in every moment of the day. So what happened? And I guess the atheist just says, well, this is a normal part of being in a broken world where there's sickness. And so I'm not sure, but I think maybe deep down there is the question of, has there been a failure? What have I done wrong? Why am I getting this news? Why is this going on right now?
So there's two questions. One is, what have I done wrong? Or if that's not where you're at, the other question could be, how could God allow this to happen to me? Why is this happening to me? Why would a good God allow this to happen to me? It's kind of two ways of interpreting this news. And I'm assuming that maybe you had that experience yourself in your own journey when like there's this shock of this, and maybe just talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I'm a pretty spiritual guy in the sense of having an intimate relationship with God. And so God really matters to me. Like I'm always, growing up, and my life is sort of conducted on, how would God view this, and what's God doing, and those sorts of things. So I believe he's actively involved in my life. So when I got this crazy cancer diagnosis, high grade, real serious, life-threatening, I had to reconcile that with my theology. And I'll just use the word theology, which just means my relationship with God and what I think about him. And I had to go on a journey theologically, like, God, why did you allow this? Or why is this happening? Is there some kind of an intervening force here? Something's wrong. So, yeah.
Yeah, in the Gospels, there's this great story where a blind person comes up to be healed, and he's asked by, I think it's either the disciples or the people around him. It's like, who sinned, or him or his parents? So that in their mind, there was only a category of, if bad things had happened to you, it had to be because you or your parents had sinned. You had done something to deserve this, and so there was a false understanding, because Jesus immediately corrects them and says neither.
Yeah.
And I think just because we have now two categories, what did I do wrong? So did I sin? Did I create an issue for myself here?
Mm-hmm.
Or God must not be good.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's another category because bad things happen here.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the question might be is that the only two? Is there more to this than just the binary? And they had this one category. It must have been who this, and she's like, nope, that's actually that's not a correct way of thinking about the world. So their worldview was off. The way they thought about life was off.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've had to wrestle with this a little bit yourself. Is there more than two categories?
Yeah, and there's, like, as a Christ follower, Jesus was speaking, and it was something like, does a father give his child a snake? In other words, God only gives good gifts. It was the sense of, and you being evil know how to give good gifts, how much more your Father in heaven knows how to give good gifts, right? And so when this happened to me, I was like, well, did God have anything to do with this? And then I get into what role does the enemy have in things that happen to me as a Christ follower, as a child of God? And that gets into that whole issue. So there's a lot of things going into this discussion. And then you're dealing with the medical piece and the life-threatening piece.
Yeah.
So it's a whole journey.
Yeah. We did Job a while back.
Yeah.
And Job has this interesting picture out there, and it was Satan bringing calamity proposals for Job to God. And you see God saying, do with Job up to this point. And so there's almost this theology that's being put out there that while God wasn't proposing the calamity or the bad thing to happen to him, it went across his desk, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think, so if I were to think about your cancer journey, it came across his desk.
Yeah, and that was the place where after careful study of the scriptures, including Job and other places, that was where I landed. That, God had a big role to play in this. But before I got there, I had to talk about whose child I am and identity issues. Who am I in God's kingdom? And so that was a whole nother analysis also.
Yeah, I think that's the big place where I think we were wanting to go a little bit, is to understand if we start with a premise of just trying to figure out is, this idea of why do bad things happen to good people, or why do bad things happen at all? Where does it come from? That's something that we could spin our wheels on a little bit, but why did you have this immediate reaction whenever you get bad news that I must have done something bad? I hear this a lot in different, arenas. I remember a friend of mine a while back. He had misled something or somebody at some point, and then within a few days, what was it? It was a situation where his car broke down and things went, and he was like, well, I think this was punishment for me misleading this person. And so it was interpreted in that it must be happening because I did this action that was not so good. And so it comes back to me in form because I'm such a bad guy.
Yeah. People argue karma.
It's
like a karma
now,
thing. Yeah.
Now we're talking. It's like, so karma, like where did we get the idea that karma was, don't we see plenty of thieves and criminals that appear to be succeeding? I mean, we do have Wall Street still, right? Sorry,
Sean
I worked there.
Because I have a son on Wall Street. So. I think for me, when I think about my past, obviously if I misbehaved, I was punished. If I didn't study for the test, I didn't get a good grade. If I wasn't playing well in my sport, I was benched. So there was always this thing, this causation, and then there was a result. And the result was, if it's a negative result, then the causation must have been me doing something wrong.
This is really good. So
Yeah.
that you believe that we have it's been indoctrinated into you that causation, cause comes, and then you have the
Yeah. Conversely, if I studied well for the test, then I got an A and everyone was happy. If I practiced and played well, everyone was psyched about that. You know what I mean? If I behaved well, I didn't get punishment. So there was this like direct relationship between causation and either a positive or a negative result.
Did you ever study hard and were not able to meet the grade?
That was law school.
Interesting. Huh.
No, I still did okay, but yeah, I mean there are times, of course, of studying hard and not getting a good grade. Yes.
Yeah. Were you ever blamed and punished for something that you actually didn't do?
Oh yeah.
So there's both categories.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we strongly believe in the first category that causation is maybe our worldview right now. And I'm going to say this is maybe like a westernized worldview, is that we have a hierarchy in causation, meaning that how hard I apply into this is going to tell you the result of the event.
Yeah. And I'm going to just
jump in.
Yeah. Creeds and everything since the early church fathers was, if I said to a Christian, do you believe that God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, all loving, right? That means all powerful, everywhere, all loving, all that. Then if something bad happens to me, like a cancer diagnosis, what was the causation there? Did I do something wrong? Like, you can understand why you would go to that question.
Yes, I think I do understand why we go to the question, because there is a high correlation between results about certain things and how hard I work in various arenas. So there's something to be said about that. But does it apply to life and death, sickness and health?
I think for me, it was a journey about God and about the mystery. And that, I mean, Job is a great example of what we're talking about here, in the sense of he did allow calamity to happen to Job's life, even though Job is described as a righteous man.
The most
Consider
righteous,
this man Job. Yes,
the most righteous of the time.
Yeah.
And so the most righteous was given,
and righteous meant obedient, obeying the laws,
doing the right things,
doing the right things. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was building business the right way, and he did it with integrity. So he was a hard worker, apparently, as well as he wasn't cheating people. And
great name, man of integrity. Yeah. Everyone knew him.
Right. So when that happened to him,
the three friends came. What did you do wrong, Job?
Yes, they asked the question, what did you do wrong? That's right.
And you can understand why they would ask that.
And what was Job's response?
Wish I hadn't been born. I didn't do anything wrong. You're not thinking about this correctly.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah,
he had a lot of chapters devoted to that discussion.
Yeah, he did. But I think you did the overarching thing. Yeah. So I find that there is this concept of, so we see it here in the story of Job, and so as we just talked about, because we didn't really plan out how it would flow here, but you see this show up, this mentality. It's a human mentality. Is what did that person do wrong? You must have done something wrong for this to come your way.
And even at the end, he's like, challenge, God, what the heck is going on here? And where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? And he goes through his creation, nature, and talks about all these things that happen. Doesn't answer him directly, right?
That's right. Yeah. What did Job take on himself? There was some nature of this that he took on himself, that he did get to that point of he wasn't in the point of what did I do wrong. He was at the point of saying, why did you allow this to happen to me? Why would a good God allow this to happen to me?
Great. Yeah.
So he was in one of the two big questions. He wasn't in the, which is interesting. He was able actually to stand in his, hey, I know that I haven't cheated anybody. I know that I have done, life in a righteous manner, so to speak. Not that anybody has a perfect life, but
and in the beginning, he says, God gives and he takes.
yes, he did start out that way. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away.
Yeah.
But in the end, he recognized like this thing that happened to him was so heinous, so harsh,
Right.
That it caused him to question, how could a good God allow suffering? Because he was actually getting down to that point in his own life where he was like, I wished that I had never been born. Why did you do this, God? Why did you even allow this to take place?
Right. And God's like, gird up your loins like a man, I'm going to speak to you now. And he does this creation argument. I feed this, the Leviathan I do this with. It goes through all this stuff, right? And Job says, I'm sorry for my attitude, and I ask for your forgiveness, but I'm sorry for my attitude. And then he said, which I love this when I talk about this, is I only knew of you before, but now I have seen you. The sense is this new intimacy.
Yes.
After having gone through this experience, the whole thing, he has a new intimacy with God.
Yes, and I think this is going to get to the heartbeat of this piece there. And there's something deeply important in being able to ask questions. Job wasn't punished for asking the question, right? There wasn't something that happened to him that was a punishment. It was, in fact, he actually got to hear from God in a big way, and that God didn't speak in a gentle voice towards him there at times, but he gives him a gentle outcome. Mm-hmm. On the back, so he has great mercy on him, which I think is really fascinating that we see, and we saw that in David's psalm. We saw that he cried out with a lot of passion, and then he even wished some pretty heinous things on the people around him because he wanted to see some great punishment, had them skinned alive, is the piece that he set out there. And I find that honest, authentic expression is probably fine. And but I don't see this concept of what did you do wrong that you deserve to be treated this way. I'm curious how Job got to the point, because he didn't live a sinless life, how he got to the point of knowing that wasn't that it wasn't because of his unrighteousness that this was happening. It's an interesting question, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But he fell into one of the two buckets.
Yeah.
But how could you do this, God?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we got to see a little bit of the behind the scenes, at least I don't know if it's allegorical or if it's, but in some manner, we get to see this written down dialogue between Satan and God. And God says, consider my servant Job. Do you think maybe he said, consider my servant Peter?
I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe, right? That's kind of the mindset that I've taken, is that God allowed this to happen. It passed by his desk first.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But I think, like, this was part of my analysis, was what is the role of the enemy? And yeah, my analysis is that he's like a prowling lion, the scripture says, seeking to devour, destroy, all that. So, but that he's on a leash. That's always been my understanding. God still has the ultimate authority. They're not equal in power. God is the supreme power. And the story is that Satan and a third of the angels rebelled against him. Satan wanted to be like him, and he was cast out of heaven, right?
Yeah.
So it's not as if he's God. He was like one of the most powerful angels, but not God. And so God has authority over him. And Job is a great example of that authority. Jesus is too, when he casts demons out, when he does what he does. So, yeah, my attitude when I went through, think about this. I'm getting surgeries. I'm going through a life-threatening illness. And I got down to the point where I said, I am God's. He owns me. I'm his son, beloved son, right? And he has allowed this to happen. And I may never know the purpose and the reason. Excuse me. But, that's what I took away from it.
You took away that you're his beloved son and that he has a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all you had.
Yes.
Which is kind of what Job was left with also.
Yeah.
On the backside of this, there's a thing. So we talked about this universal sense of, like the questioning that comes at the diagnosis. What does this mean? What is its purpose? And what is it all about? And you and I were kind of connecting on. We've been doing this work, Sacred Romance of John Eldridge's, as a group exercise, and he described a universal yearning. He also described it as a haunting, a recognition of a deep desire inside of us for something that was. It was the thing that could touch our hearts. And the thing that I found most interesting about that is that it was a universal thing. I think all of us can say, hey, we long to have our hearts touched at the deepest place. And he does this whole kind of workup on how to just take a little time to go back and look at your own background and past, and when you experienced that point, this deep longing, and then what took it away. And that was, he defined as the message of the arrows. And the message of the arrows are big, and they are tragedy, and they're the things that, as we just described here a second ago, the enemy wants to use to tell us that we're not valuable, that there's not this message that we had early on, this message of the yearning for deep romance, adventure, excitement is not real. It's not what's valid about ourselves. And yet God still allows that. And so I'm just thinking about that in terms of where we're at in this conversation about, I've been given a cancer diagnosis. The very first questions that come to mind are, I deserve this, or God doesn't love me, or God's not the God I thought he was. He just not good. And so both of them have a negative context. And what you just described a second ago is that after review, after taking time to really understand it, there's something sitting in between that isn't those two things, because those are both messages of the arrows, I think, which is exactly what the enemy wants to use calamity for. But you don't know the ultimate purposes of what God had planned. But I think you can sit back now and look and see that there was something there that was of deep value that that has been used by this journey. And has it touched your heart? So that's a question for you. It's like, has this been a tool for God to touch that deepest part of you, your heart?
Yeah, I think of the deepest times of suffering, sensing the deepest embrace from God. ICU, contemplating my passing, 5% chance to survival, huge incision, huge recovery. Do I even do it? Sensing God's embrace. Yeah, so in the deepest pit, sensing a deep, deep touch from God. It was more of a romantic thing than it was an intellectual thing. It was a relational thing.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that, as we were thinking about this particular concept a little bit, is the fact that we have a deep yearning and we feel even some level of injustice. We feel the pain of the message of brokenness. It's touching something deeper, and it's something that I've been wanting to really just grab hold of in a big way. Is rather than starting with the question of what did I do wrong, starting with I am beloved. I am loved at such a great level, and that belovedness is such an important part of who we are that I don't have to do. That whole thing you were talking about a second about the performative based nature of westernized culture. But no son or daughter ever has to perform. That's in a truly loving family. If you're a beloved son or daughter, it's not about whether you make the track team or you don't, or the football team or you don't, or that you achieved at the highest levels from an Ivy League institution or not. To be a beloved son or daughter means that your father or mother sees you and truly loves you as beloved, as somebody who they want the best for in every way, and are looking out for you in such a way that that they want to be able to show love and care. But it doesn't always look like what the kid thinks it should look like.
Right. And I mean, we all come from brokenness and dysfunction. I'll say most of us. So, we may not love in that way our kids even because we receive something else and our parents receive something else. You know what I mean?
I would say all of us. Yeah, I think it is a universal.
All of us probably, right? Yeah.
It's like there's anyone who comes to me now and says, "Hey, my family was perfect." I immediately view them as delusional.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that because they don't mean the best.
Right.
It just means that they've so blinded themselves with the normalization of their formative years that it's like a delusion. It's like they've made themselves a romanticized view of this, and I think there's something beautiful in that too, in the fact that we can love even the broken in a romanticized sense, that we don't have to burn the house down because something wasn't right about it, and that's a healthy tension for us to live from. And I think that's what we're exploring a little bit today, and is that as valued people, that as creations, that certainly we feel deeply when these things, this negative experience comes, a diagnosis, and maybe even a life-threatening nature to a something that is telling you that, hey, this here may kill you. It is such a devastating blow, but our next step isn't to beat ourselves up. It's to recognize our belovedness. I think that's like the most important thing you can get to is your belovedness. If you notice that Job didn't immediately go to, oh, my friends come and say I did something wrong, I need to start trying to chase all over the countryside to figure out what it is. It's like, no, that's not actually it. There's something else here.
Yeah.
And he didn't fully know it, but he got to experience God in a deeper way by not accepting that message of arrows that, hey, you messed this up. This is why you are where you're at. And so maybe that's the encouragement today on the backside of this.
Yeah, and I think, be careful of the voices that you hear around you too. I mean, I especially resonate with that. Like, for instance, in Job's case, his wife said, "Joe, just curse God and die." And then the three friends came in, and the message was, causation. You've done something wrong. that was not the case
Right.
in the experience of suffering that he had. Extreme suffering, too. He ended up with a deeper revelation of God.
Yeah. I think that's the most encouraging thing that we could think about is from here is that your journey may be an invitation to deep intimacy with God.
Right.
And my guess is it is, no matter what else.
And I think, like, recently someone contacted me and said, I got this serious diagnosis, and my first inclination was to be silent and sit in the dirt with them, tell them how sorry I was. And I didn't communicate any of this, God wants more intimacy. Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't the time or place. So it's to be sensitive where the person's at. And you don't have to have an answer, right? And sometimes we give answers because of our own issues within us,
That's true. Yeah. We don't, if we don't have the ability to sit in the dirt, this is good. I think you're highlighting something is, and you're even, in some ways, it's a good corrective way of saying to me is like, hey, start with sitting in the dirt.
Yeah.
And when I don't have to give you a good answer, it's okay for us to sit here and wait,
right,
and find out that which is real and true. Because there's also a certain other piece to this, and that is we can't look at this and try to make this all universally one thing or another. Sometimes we do bring calamity on ourselves.
Correct.
Sometimes it is our own actions that bring suffering. And both of you and I have spent a lot of time in recovery circles. And one of the biggest things we do is take time to do a moral inventory. And we start taking ownership for our part. And then we make amends for those things that we've done wrong so that we are cleaning our side of the street. And so there's a whole great process here of allowing these dark night of the souls to get us to do a moral inventory and examination of it. And so this isn't just set in beloved. There's a lot of components here.
Right. And that's a great point. And Sean, I've been in meetings before in prayer room meetings where the person who was going to pray over the person diagnosed with cancer explored what sin they had in their lives. Right. And it was misplaced in that particular person, in that space. I think when someone gets news like a cancer diagnosis, they don't need to be talking about what they've done wrong.
Right.
They need someone to sit in the dirt with them, show them compassion and grace and mercy and kindness, because it's a tough diagnosis to get. And personally, what I do, because I love recovery, I love looking at my part, and personally what I like to do is share my own log in my eye, but let God do that work in the person's life, Because people, a lot of times, they'll get to that point. They'll be like, hey, what did I do wrong? That's part of that analysis.
Yeah.
But what I like is, like, I'm at a point 20 years later, after everything I've been through, where I can relate to what James says when he says, consider it all joy when you have trials of various kinds.
I'm not there yet.
Yeah. No, you aren't there yet. But I mean, after 20 years, but that's not a place I go to right away.
I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes, one has to be able to live that.
Yeah.
They can't be told that.
Yeah.
I think what we try to do so much of the time is use that as a word of, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
As opposed to allowing God to bring them to that place in a sense.
Yeah.
Because Job obviously didn't enjoy the suffering he was put through. And I think it would be hard pressed to say that he considered it joy. But there's, I think that the whole point of that is to show, in a sense, that yes, that suffering doesn't come without purpose, though. And so if we can understand that purpose and know that it's not to harm us, but to only for good, then in one sense, in a just from looking at it from an angle, like over your shoulder,
right,
you could consider it joy in the moment of it. Right. But I think that that shouldn't be overplayed. I think there's a sense of that gets overplayed as a way of almost trying to squelch somebody's time of suffering. It's like, well, you should just be considering this joy, as opposed to recognizing there's great lament and that goes on when there's great suffering too.
In the last 24 hours, a call from a good buddy had just lost his daughter. Call from another young man that his marriage was falling apart. Those are not times to say, well, consider it all joy.
Yeah, let's have a party right now, guys.
No. Those are laments, sitting in the dirt, expressing grief. Grieving is a huge part of this.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Just thinking about how this goes there, just knowing how valuable we are, though. And I think your journey, what you're doing right now is that you're testifying to, yes, you've had a 20-year journey of suffering in this cancer space. And, that you can now look at it and understand the joy of that journey. But there's been so many times of suffering, and as we've done your journal and we've gone through and talked about the surgeries or interacted or relived that, it wasn't in that moment. Because somebody coming to say, consider it all joy, they might have got punched in the face.
Yeah, there's your joy.
Yeah. But you can look back now and say, yeah, I see great joy in what God's done in my life and in my family and in the relationships I have. And I think I know because of our interactions, like you wouldn't give those up for anything. But you also wouldn't wish that suffering on anybody.
I'm not thankful for the cancer, but I'm thankful for the way Jesus has partnered with me in this journey. That's how I like to put it.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about the sacred romance some more in future episodes, and just think about the components of it, because there's some really important aspects for our own journeys. And one of my favorite things that this concept, and you and I have already kicked it around a little bit, but it was this idea of not settling for, and he called it in romantic terms, for less wild lovers, which is such a great concept that we're being asked to settle for less. And the reason why we're talking about this in a cancer and peace space is that don't settle for the less, that you're being called into something that is much greater, much wilder, much that touches that deepest part of your heart. And that's the journey that we want to really explore in a bigger degree in the coming weeks. So
that's good.
So thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.